Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. China is waking up today, still dealing with the shockwaves from Venezuela, but the tone has shifted from disbelief to recalculation. Yesterday, the dominant theme was damage control after the U.S. snatched Nicolás Maduro and flew him to New York. Today, the conversation inside Beijing is less emotional and more surgical. The quiet consensus forming is that this wasn't just a political embarrassment, it exposed a hard intelligence failure. When China's senior envoy was still shaking hands in Miraflores Palace hours before the raid, that's not bad timing, that's a blind spot. And that realization is settling in across the system. What's new in the last 24 hours is how this is rippling outward. Latin American governments that have spent years hedging between Washington and Beijing are openly reassessing what Chinese backing actually buys them. China can fund ports, build roads, and provide political cover. But when the U.S. decides to use force in its hemisphere, Beijing's response toolkit is statements and diplomacy. That contrast is now front and center in regional capitals, and it's not subtle. There's also a sharper technical discussion emerging that didn't fully break through yesterday. Venezuelan air defenses, much of them Chinese-made, appear to have been ineffective during the U.S. operation. No meaningful early warning, no disruption of the raid. Maintenance and integration issues clearly played a role, but perception matters. For China, which has been marketing its air defense systems as capable and modern, this is not the brochure moment they wanted. And yes, Taipei and Tokyo are absolutely clocking that detail. Inside China, the online discourse has evolved again. Yesterday, it was raw nationalist anger. Today, it's starting to fracture. You still have loud voices saying Venezuela proves China should move faster on Taiwan, but there's a growing countercurrent pointing out the obvious. Grabbing one man in Caracas is not the same thing as moving hundreds of thousands of troops across the Taiwan Strait under fire. That tension between bravado and math is playing out more openly than usual, at least before the moderators tighten the screws. Which brings us back to Taiwan, because even though the Justice Mission 2025 drills have wrapped, the consequences are still unfolding. New reporting shows just how disruptive those exercises really were. Nearly 1,000 civilian flights were affected, shipping routes were rerouted, and critical air and sea lanes were treated like training props. This wasn't just about signaling resolve, it was about demonstrating how quickly normal life can be squeezed. The message wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. Japan, meanwhile, is seeing this as part of a pattern, not a one-off. Over the past day, Tokyo confirmed additional Chinese bomber and fighter activity through the Okinawa-Miyako corridor. Again, nothing crossed sovereign airspace. That's not the point. The point is normalization. Every transit conditions both sides. Every scramble builds familiarity. China is steadily making long-range operations beyond the first island chain feel routine, and Japan is being forced to respond like it's routine too. At the same time, Beijing has turned up pressure on Japan in a more tangible way. The ban on dual-use exports isn't new news, but the implications are becoming clearer. Chinese officials still haven't specified exactly which items are restricted, and that ambiguity is deliberate. It keeps Japanese industry guessing and markets uneasy. State-linked outlets are openly floating rare earth controls again, a reminder that China still holds leverage over materials Japan needs for cars, electronics, and defense manufacturing. Tokyo is calling it unacceptable. Beijing is calling it a response to mistakes. Neither side looks ready to blink. While all this is happening, China's military posture continues to harden in the background. Satellite imagery confirmed all 3 Chinese aircraft carriers are now back at major naval bases after a very busy 2025. Liaoning, Shandong, and Fujian have all been operational, with Fujian, the newest and most advanced, still drawing attention as China's first carrier built with electromagnetic catapults. This is the world's largest navy by hull count, and it's getting more confident operating farther from shore. The U.S. Navy staying visible in the South China Sea isn't accidental. It's a reminder that this chessboard has more than one queen. Down south, China hasn't slowed its island-building habits either. New land reclamation activity at a disputed reef in the Paracels shows dredgers back at work, expanding facilities near key sea lanes. This is classic slow burn consolidation. No dramatic announcement, just concrete, sensors, and time. It's the same approach Beijing has used for over a decade, and it keeps paying dividends. Diplomatically, China is trying to keep Venezuela from defining the entire narrative. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's visit wrapped up with familiar language about cooperation, but today the security subtext stands out more clearly. Lee is pressing China to play a mediating role with North Korea, even as Pyongyang continues missile activity. Beijing's response remains consistent. Talk about stability, avoid specifics, and say nothing about denuclearization. That silence isn't accidental, it's policy. At the same time, Beijing is subtly working the wedge between Seoul and Tokyo. Xi Jinping leaned into shared historical grievances over Japan's wartime past, dusting off an old but reliable playbook. It's not about rewriting alliances overnight. It's about creating just enough daylight to complicate coordination. Elsewhere, China continues reinforcing relationships it sees as foundational. Pakistan featured prominently in official messaging over the last day, with renewed emphasis on the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and counterterrorism cooperation. What makes this more interesting now is Islamabad's quiet warming toward Washington. Beijing clearly sees the hedging and is responding the way great powers do, by reaffirming loyalty and investment before the drift becomes permanent. Africa remains another underappreciated front. Convictions of Chinese nationals tied to illegal gold trading in conflict zones in the Democratic Republic of the Congo are adding to scrutiny of China's overseas footprint. Analysts continue to stress there's no evidence of Beijing directing these activities. But the pattern, Chinese buyers, Chinese-made weapons, fragile states, keeps resurfacing. It's a reputational bleed that doesn't dominate headlines, but never really stops. And then there's the internal picture. Beijing is tightening control at home as external pressure rises. Legal revisions expanding police and security authority continue moving forward, reinforcing discipline across public security, courts, and prosecutors. Another senior official was sentenced this week under the anti-corruption campaign, a reminder that loyalty is being enforced, not assumed. When the outside world feels less predictable, the instinct inside the system is always to clamp down harder. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the RH community. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribing, leaving a quick 5-star review, or sharing it with someone you know makes a huge difference. It's how this network will grow. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on the Middle East and the DPRK. This is free for Substack subscribers. Starting January 16th, new Substack subscribers will move to a paid model. If you're already subscribed on Substack before then, nothing changes. You'll keep full access to everything free forever. New subscribers after January 15th will receive the daily written brief, weekly deep dives on economics, sanctions, and more for a monthly fee. So if you're not on Substack yet, don't worry. Just head to restrictedhandling.com and subscribe now for free and get the content free forever.